All right. Um, Good afternoon. Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining those who are able to join this meeting, this revision meeting. I know all of you are cloistered in your homes, and some of you are really frustrated because you miss history. So I thought it might be a great idea for us to have a short revision session. I want to start at the beginning. So this part many times get glossed over, but this is one of the most important skills as an art historian and as a designer that you can develop for yourself. And that is to be able to take the work at face value and to understand the work that you see and to interpret the work that you see, and then later on to be able to place that within other theoretical frameworks and the larger body of work that is being created in the world today. So I have shared with you a lecture in the beginning of the year to understand the visual properties of art and how we can look at art and analyze the work at face value. And we looked at a couple of methods of how to do that, and we've looked at a technique, but we didn't have any time to actually apply it. And I think for revision, this is a great way for us to internalize this work by looking at a piece of art and analyzing it together based on its formal properties alone. So what we do not talk about when we look at a work of art and we use formal analysis. So when this is the first time you've looked at the art, you do not consider these things. These things come later, only later. And if you're being asked a question where you need to analyze an artwork on its formal properties, then you are not going to focus on these aspects that might influence the work either. So at first we ignore the historical context. We ignore the geographical context. So actually not when, but where the work was created. We do not consider the history. We do not, the broader history, the historical events, the political events in that country or that area that might influence the work. Social issues, we disregard those as well. Philosophical viewpoints, we disregard all of that. And we also do not consider the biography of the artist, so the life of the artist. And even today we would use the artist's statement as a way for understanding the body of work. So we will ignore artist statements, we'll ignore manifestos. All those things are things that we will utilize as tools at a later stage. But you first need to look at the work yourself. You first need to look at the work and develop your own visual vocabulary, your vocabulary of seeing. And these are the tools that you use to articulate what you are seeing. So it is very important to develop the vocabulary, the words, to be able to describe what you are seeing. And this is something that is very challenging for many visual artists, is to find the words, because they see in shape, they see in abstract form, they see in image, and they actually don't interpret primarily, or their first instinct is not to use words. So let's see what artwork I have for us to analyze together. And this is the artwork. And I purposefully am not going to tell you anything, although just by looking at it, there are already a lot of information that you can deduce from looking at this artwork. And I think you must take a minute to look at the piece and see what you see. So in broad terms, what I can describe what I'm seeing is I'm seeing somebody dancing. I'm seeing someone dancing. I'm seeing people looking at the dancer, but the dancer is not even the main focus. Although there's a circle around her, she's not the main focus of the artwork. There is in the front a lady in a pink dress, and most of the rest of the artwork, it consists of green overtones. The green, the teals, even sort of the charcoal has got a lot of green elements in it. Look at the pens that this man is using. So there's a lot of green. There is a limited color palette of pinks, reds, and then some monochromatic colors of browns and charcoals. And then we've got the greens, the various greens. And then something else, which is kind of a cream color, a camel toffee color, and that occurs in the skin, that occurs in this dress, that occurs on the floor, on the background. And to me, it looks like it is actually exposing part of the substrate. So the substrate is that which the artwork is made on. That could be paper, that could be canvas, that could be found materials, whatever. But in this case, I assume, because it has a uniform kind of color, it either is canvas or paper. And it could also be even that this is discoloration of the substrate. So it is like you see with paper yellowing over time. It could even be something like that. So let's start to consider the various elements of art. Now, with different artworks, you're going to have certain elements are used or are visible a lot more prominent than others. So it's not going to necessarily be always the case that you're going to have that in. Okay. The first one is line, and we can ask the question, is this artist considering a line, or are they more focused on only shapes? I will say there is a strong leaning towards a line. To me, it looks like the artist has drawn line, and then from the line created further color panels and shapes, etc. To me, it looks like it's this, in terms of the art making process, or the process in making the artwork, that the artist focused a lot on line, and that was sort of what is the basis of the work. There are certain elements, like you can see here in the pants, there's a strong line and it looks like it has been filled in then with some color. Or some where there's complete disregard for things like shadow in the red stockings. There's a definite line that delineates where the stockings end and the background begins. Even in something like this coat, this man's coat in the left corner, I see, look at that line to create the arm of the coat. There's no color difference in terms of the shapes, right? There's an outer shape of the coat, but then the inner detail is added in with line. Even further back, there's a strong sense of line here in the background, and this is creating a texture. But I'm already jumping a gun because texture is one of the elements of art that is as a prompt in a later stage. Shape and form. So as I've now said, yes, there's a strong emphasis on line, and he's using line to create texture. He's using line to create the shapes and the forms. Here, line is in the reverse, so here a light line has been used to create the sense of texture, the texture of the form of the coat, of the fur, sorry, of the collar of this woman. Here a darker line has been used to create the folds, the intricate folds of the dress as the woman is pulling up the dress to reveal her legs as she is dancing. Color, there is a strong use of what kind of color scheme? A complementary color scheme. And that complementary color scheme is made up of the greens all over this painting with the pink and red accents. So you can see in this hat that this woman is wearing, the red lips that pop out. Obviously, the stockings of this dancer, this lady dancing in the center. But then you've also got figures at the back. Look at that red coat, where everybody is merely wearing a monotonous kind of charcoal coat. You suddenly have this pop of red to pull your eye back towards the background so that you don't just focus here on the foreground. And of course, I cannot ignore this beautiful, luscious pink. So this pink is standing out even more so because of the overuse of all the greens across the artwork. So the strong use of color and awareness of color theory by this artist. How is space being used? Well, I will say that there is a very interesting use of space. You've got the figures that occupy, although this is a two-dimensional plane, we've got them occupying most of the space of the canvas, of the artwork or the picture plane. And then suddenly you've got this negative space, this open space here, where the legs of the two dancers are. And it's so beautiful in terms of creating that rhythm between the two dancers, the dialogue that dancing is creating. And this negative space is emphasizing these red stockings, these legs that are exposed even more so. We've also got some negative space being used here. So there's a definite foreground, figures in our foreground. We've got a midground with these two dancers, and then we've got the background with the other kind of predominantly what's interesting men in this picture, and then the ultimate background with our bartender and the lights and the dancing hall showing it's even stretching further than that. I've already actually jumped the gun by talking about texture. So texture being created by using line. We've got different mark making techniques being utilized here. So this kind of haphazard mark making is creating that illusion of the fur on the dress. And you can see sort of there's a different application of the paint or the ink on the dress to create that silky smoothness. And then you've got also texture being used. Look at this mark making to create that illusion of texture on the hat, and then also the texture that's being created in this background by this really quick succession of marks being applied. And that adds to the rhythm. I'm already also talking about other things that we will come to. Surface and depth. Depth is created only through the illusion of the figures, one figure in front of the other. There's no real difference the artist is using the color to bring this figure of the woman in the pink to the front, to bring this woman dancing with the red stockings also toward the viewer. But in terms of everything else, I mean, the color in this coat and the color of this woman's cloak and coat and that man's coat in the background, there's and even this man in the mid, there's an even use of color hues here. The only way we have a sense of depth is the fact that he is in front of that man. And there's also that sense of scale. So she is, in terms of scale, a lot shorter or smaller than he is. So obviously we read it as she is in the background, and this bartender is in the background because of his scale, his size. And then lastly, light and shadow. Not too much emphasis placed on light and shadow. There's more an emphasis on color usage and the complementary color scheme to carry the message through. Now I'm going to use the principles of composition to address the overall, so the sum of the parts. We've looked at individual aspects like line and color and texture and how surface and depth is being created. But now we want to look at the whole. So how is the whole composition created? Is there a sense of balance? Is there a sense of symmetry? Or is there a sense of emphasis? I would say there is a definite sense of a use of an asymmetrical composition because of this pink, this bright pink dress on the right-hand side. And it is balanced. There is, however, balance created through the very strong reds of the stockings and that red jacket. That red jacket of that figure in the background is holding the balance of the work in play. If that was not there, our eyes would only have looked at this pink dress and the stockings, and we wouldn't have ran through the whole work. So that red jacket at the back is very, very important. And then we've got a secondary, this figure is looking at another figure, another man, in a dark, dark maroon coat. So it is a red, but a receding red. So we've got elements of receding reds in the background that aid your eye to look at the artwork a little bit longer. There is definitely some movement being created, some rhythm being created here. The movement is being created through the illusion of the diagonal line of this leg that's jumped up. It is like we have captured that moment of her, that dramatic moment where this woman is lifting up her leg and she is in the thrust of going to pound this leg down on that wooden floor in that rhythm of the dance that she's making. I have mentioned how depth was created, and that was created through the use of scale. So again, proportion is achieved through scale. The figures in the foreground, they are larger in size. The figures in the midground, somewhat smaller, and then the receding figures of the background, smaller and smaller and smaller. The same with scale. So proportion and scale, dependent on the type of artwork, you would focus on the one more than on the other. And then lastly, is there any kind of pattern? Is there any kind of repetition? Something that creates rhythm and variety, but through that some kind of unity? Well, yes, definitely. Through the mark making of this work, and you can see here at the background, that quick succession of repetitive mark making, repetitive, there you hear it. We see a background texture being created, and that is strong, small, it consists of small little diagonals, and those little diagonals echo the biggest diagonal, which is the legs of these two dancers. And those diagonal lines create that energy. Because remember, in the beginning, I've spoken about line. So these legs, we get actual lines, but if you can remember from the beginning of the year, we've also spoken about implied lines. And that is where the artist wants you to look at. And these legs are creating those diagonal implied lines. And that diagonal lines is a line with energy, and it already has a lot more movement, implied movement, than anything else. And then the second method that the artist used to create unity is definitely through the use of color. Color is one of the most important aspects of this work of art. This interesting teal type of green with the yellow undertones. And you can see here, even here, we've got a bright green, and how that contrasts in a complementary color scheme with the reds and the pinks. And that is how you will analyze an artwork without knowing anything about the artwork itself. Now we can move beyond what we've just looked at, and we can start to figure out what historical context this work was being created, where this work was created, and who made it and why. Thank you for joining. Oh.